So we're going to have some folks join us. Major General Kim Crider again. I think it's Major General Kim Crider and Nina Schick, but I'm not sure. It could be some sort of deep fake. We'll find out if it's actually them or not. That's what they're going to talk about. I'm going to turn it over to Major General Kim Crider, who is a deep AI and national security expert, former chief technology officer of the Space Force, who's been helping organize some of these conversations together. And today she has Nina Schick, the author of one of the very first books on deep fakes. And I'm really honored to have you guys both together. I'll turn it over to you, Major General Crider.
Thank you, David. It's really great to be back here at the C.L.A.S.S Summit for another exciting fireside chat that we're going to have here today. As David mentioned, we're going to talk about this really cool topic called deep fakes, and deep fakes at the heart of it is the challenge of really trying to understand in today's world what's real and what isn't. And I've got a wonderful guest joining me here today. As David mentioned, I've recently retired. I retired last year out of the Space Force, where I was the Chief Technology Innovation Officer. Prior to that, I was the Chief Data Officer for the Air Force. But since I've retired, I've been at Deloitte, and I'm leading Deloitte's AI innovation. I'm the executive chair for AI innovation for national security and defense. And I'll tell you, it's a role that I'm very much honored to play, because as we look across the entire government space, we really have to be mindful of how vitally valuable artificial intelligence can be to help accelerate operations, to help provide competitive advantage, providing insights and information in new ways with new understanding that we didn't have before. But we also have to be aware of some of the potential challenges of leveraging AI, and some of the potential ways in which AI can be used against us. And that's part and parcel to what we're going to be talking about here today with Nina Schick. Nina, thank you for being here with us. I'm going to introduce you briefly, and then we're going to talk about this really cool topic that you've been writing on and studying. And I think our audience is going to be very intrigued to really get a sense of what this is all about. So Nina Schick is an author and consultant on how emerging technologies are affecting politics and international relations. Last year, she published the book, Deep Fakes, The Coming Infocalypse, if I've said that right, Nina?
Yeah, Infocalypse.
Infocalypse. Okay, there we go. The Coming Infocalypse, which looks at how technology, in particular, the ability to make sophisticated deep fakes, is aiding the spread of mis and disinformation, and potentially making society even less connected to reality than it already was. Nina has advised many people and organizations on this topic, including President Joe Biden and a former Secretary General of NATO. She's also been featured in the MIT Tech Review, The Times, and CNN, among many others. Nina, again, thank you so much for joining me. Before we get started, thank you. Before we get started with some questions, tell us a little bit more about deep fakes and this idea of the infocalypse.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what a deep fake is essentially a piece of media. It can come in any format: audio, video, images, or text, that's either been manipulated by artificial intelligence, or entirely created by artificial intelligence. And this is really revolutionary, right? If you look at the ability for AI to actually create fake content that didn't exist before. This has only been in the realm of the possible for about 5 years. I've been tracking this area for about 5 years, and the recent advances, in particular over only the last 6 months, are simply astounding. So even from when I started researching this area and considering how basically AI could be used to create very convincing disinformation that look like it's real video, but it's not authentic at all. The space has evolved so much, because basically what we're looking at now is a future in which all content will be generated predominantly by artificial intelligence. That's not to say that all of it's going to be disinformation. A lot of it is going to just change the course of human communication and the digital ecosystem entirely. But of course, this will be weaponized to create very, very potent disinformation as well.
Very interesting. So creating content artificially, right, using artificial intelligence, essentially creating synthetic content, right?
Exactly.
So let's talk about this a little bit more in terms of the uses of it, the prevalence of it. How prevalent is the current use of deepfakes? Where do we see it playing out, and where do you see it becoming more common?
So again, I'd start by saying that I think as I've studied this field over the past few years, I've come to the conclusion that the future, which we're heading to very soon, and not all of this is going to be malicious, a lot of it is going to be for legitimate use cases, is that basically all digital content, the stuff that billions of us interact with daily, multiple times a day, is going to be created by artificial intelligence. Now, if you consider the malicious applications of synthetic media or deepfakes, that's really where the story starts, because just like the internet itself, what we found with AI created content is that the first pioneering use case was in non-consensual pornography. And that's where it really started back in 2017 when the research community, when people discovered that some of the papers coming out of the AI research community meant that it was easier for somebody who had an interest in machine learning to basically create fake content that looked like it was authentic. The first thing that they did was create non-consensual pornography of women. A very gendered problem. A few years down the line, I mean, there's an entire deepfake pornography ecosystem online. But of course, this wasn't just a tawdry woman's issue. The ability, because it turns out that what AI is really good at is at cloning people. Not only real people, so that already right now with a little bit of training data, it's possible to clone your likeness in a synthetic video, to clone your voice in synthetic audio. But AI is also very good at creating entirely synthetic people that don't exist. So after the first use case in pornography, we've seen how this has really become a major issue for cybersecurity, not only because people's identities can be appropriated by AI. We've already seen kind of how corporations have been conned out of hundreds of thousands of dollars using this technology, but also now increasingly organizations and corporations being infiltrated by entirely synthetic people who don't exist. So whilst it started in pornography, very quickly it's become a potent cybersecurity issue. And in fact, the FBI already put out an alert back in 2021 saying that this is the #1 new cyber threat to all businesses.
Wow, that is fascinating. I had never thought of that. This whole idea of, well, first of all, let me reinforce some of the points that you just made, which I think are really important. All content, you believe, in the future will be AI generated. That AI is going to be and is becoming so prolific and so usable, right, in this context, that it will be used to generate content. All content will have some degree of AI that is helping to develop it and proliferate it. Now, and then picking up on these key points about the malicious use of AI generated content, from where this began around creating images of people that do exist, to creating identities about people that don't exist. So forget identity theft. We're talking about identity creation, creating an identity about somebody who doesn't even exist, a synthetic person. And with that, a synthetic identity that can now, infiltrate an organization, as you said, from a cybersecurity, get access, right? Because that synthetic entity presents itself as a real person with a real identity, with real identity numbers, identification that we're accustomed to going along with that, that can enable access in various insidious ways. Very fascinating. We'll talk about the legitimate uses for a minute. Let's take us back to that. So we can certainly continue to just be amazed by and frightened by some of the malicious applications, but what about the legitimate uses of this kind of capability?
Again, I think when it comes to legitimate use cases, that the fundamental point to make is that when we think about creating any type of content or anything that requires, until this point, human expertise or skill, something that we think is unique to humans to make, what's been happening only in the last few months is that generative AI models, large models, are able to simplify and automate the production process. What I mean by that is, for instance, only this year we saw the release of the first text to image generation model. So this, all that's required is for you to type into the AI model a text prompt, and based on that text prompt, the AI can then generate a completely unique image. Now, based on your text prompt, it can look like a photo, it could be a depiction of a historic scene that never happened. Just go wild with your imagination. The model can create anything. So if you think about a legitimate use case for that, obviously in any form of graphic design or art or content creation, something that people used to have to do, now you can basically just type it into the AI and the AI will create it. That's just for images, but similar models are being developed for video, for audio. So when you think about, for instance, recording music as an artist, this is something that now can just be done by artificial intelligence. Or even if you're a professional coder, now you're starting to see the release of AI models that can generate code. If you're a lawyer, you're starting to see the release of AI models that can do your drafting for you, just for a few textual prompts. So when you think about the legitimate use cases, I think the biggest point to make is that the entire way we think about creating digital content and interacting with the digital ecosystem is about to be radically transformed by AI. So this really goes back to that philosophical question of, oh, is AI automating us as humans? And a lot of these capabilities are now already being wrapped up into tools and platforms. So the question is it automating humans or is it augmenting our potential as humans? And it's a very interesting philosophical question. And we're so early still in the journey, but the advances are happening so quickly that that is a question that is going to become universal, even within the next 12 months, I would say.
That is fascinating. And I can certainly see the potential that could provide. You could take creativity to a whole nother level.
And I think there's one more point I'd like to make about the potential malicious downsides about the ubiquitous nature, because AI models will be able to generate at scale synthetic content in a way that's just been impossible before. So this means that billions of people will now be creators, right? So the kind of effects that were exclusive to a Hollywood studio just until a few years ago is something that somebody can now generate on their laptop. So this is the democratization of effects, which were exclusively in the domain of very well-resourced actors. But because this AI is going to do the heavy lifting, synthetic content is going to become ubiquitous. So one of the potential, I would almost say, existential risks is that as the information ecosystem becomes inundated with AI-generated or synthetic content, people start to lose trust in the medium of all media itself, because you no longer can distinguish what's synthetic or what's authentic. So it's not only that bad actors might use AI to create something that's synthetic to scam you or for an information operation purposes. It's also that normal people no longer trust authentic content. So it's the blurring of the lines between synthetic and authentic that is potentially a really strong existential risk especially for Western liberal democracies.
Wow, fascinating. That is another really intriguing insight. And along those lines, just to bring it back a little bit to the national security topic, when you think about blurring the lines and not being able to trust the content, this can have significant implications from a national security standpoint, and certainly from a warfighting standpoint, because as we know, all warfighting is a human endeavor, and human endeavors rely on information to, inform decision making and actions that are going to be taken. And if we don't trust the information that was being put in front of us, then we could certainly make some mistakes. So from that standpoint, where we see a fight against deep fakes and disinformation as a part of the battlefield, can you speak to effective ways of identifying these types of what can be information warfare techniques? How can we future-proof information and our ability to trust information. What can we do to identify when in fact we might be confronted with disinformation generated by AI?
Yeah, you're spot on, Kim. And I think that anything, I mean, I've been working in geopolitics for the past 2 decades, and as I'm sure you'll agree, the kind of corrosion of the information ecosystem has progressively become worse, to the extent where it's had a real impact on geopolitics. And we saw that during the pandemic. We've seen that repeatedly, in particular over the past decade. So the ability to be able to trust or build a safer information ecosystem is absolutely paramount for national security interests. And we haven't even seen what AI generated disinformation can do at scale yet, because as I mentioned, we're still very early on in this journey. And we are certainly going to start seeing, I would say in the next kind of 12 to 18 months, a lot more kind of information operations that have been based on synthetic content. So in terms of what do we do, broadly, unfortunately, there's no silver bullet solution, but broadly, you can think about taking 2 approaches. One is a kind of technological approach. What kind of technology can we invest in and integrate into the information ecosystem itself to make it a more trustworthy environment? And there you can kind of look at real-time kind of synthetic content detection tools, which will have to be based on AI, because it's going to become ubiquitous and no human will be able to tell, because of how photorealistic it is, whether something is synthetic or authentic. To the human eye, that's already a fool's errand. So you'll need to build AI kind of detection tools. Very, very difficult. It's the cybersecurity classic thing where it's going to be a game of cat and mouse. The second approach is actually building and adopting, and this is actually already being done by an organization called the C2PA, which is led by a lot of industry bodies in the United States and around the world, a open standard for media provenance and authenticity. So rather than trying to detect everything that's fake, everything that's authentic is captured at the point of creation. So it's in the metadata of every media file, where it's been created, who owns it. And for things that are synthetic but not malicious, you have a chain of provenance. So you're completely transparent about, this is synthetic, this is how it's been created, this is who created it. So that when you come across content that has no provenance or has no seal of authenticity, you know to make a better trust decision about whether or not you want to trust that. The second kind of column of solutions, if you will, are far more complicated, because this is the kind of society-wide resilience building. And because this is so all-encompassing and universal, it requires us to fundamentally rethink our legislative systems, our legal systems, digital education, building resilience in society for a human experience in an information ecosystem that is going to be so radically different from what we have known in the past 10 years. And this comes off the back of exponential tech-led change. I mean, if you consider what's happened in the past 30 years in the information ecosystem with the birth of the internet, smartphones, and social media, it's been dramatic enough. Well, it's about to get even more dramatic once generative AI comes into the solution. So we have to fundamentally rethink the paradigm of how we organize a society based on these trends.
There's a lot there. That is fascinating. I mean, definitely you've given us some practical ways in which technology can help combat this, with companies, putting forward capability like synthetic content detection. But to your point, it's AI battling against AI. And so, which algorithm is really going to win that battle? It's something to be aware of. And then this idea of really capturing the authentic content at its source, right? And tagging it appropriately and making sure that we can safeguard that in and of itself. So we have this, kind of route to go back to, or authoritative source, right? We talk about the authoritative truth. That is another way to do it. But then, speaking of this larger topic, again, you brought us yet another very large topic to think about. Not just the philosophical implications of deep fake or AI generated content from a philosophical standpoint, but from a legal standpoint, from an educational standpoint. from really the impact that it can have on our entire society and how we think about this and what that's going to potentially draw us to. So a lot there, very rich insights. In your book, you talk about a technical solution. Let's get to a very specific example from the book. A technical solution where a chip could be installed in cameras or video recorders. This chip would certify the video was taken at a particular time and location, or perhaps could identify the person who owns a phone, who could certify the validity. Can you talk about the technical approach to stewardship of photos, videos, and audio, that kind of content, which we all have access to today? We're all generating it, we're all consuming it, that can be used to demonstrate to a newspaper, for example, that the content was real.
Absolutely. So this, again, coming back to the idea of authenticity, because we are going to be inundated with so much synthetic content that rather than, it would be a fool's errand to try and detect all synthetic content. First of all, because swathes of it, I'd even venture to say the vast majority of it is going to be completely benign, because it's going to be things like memes or user generated experiences or for entertainment purposes, so it'll be completely benign. But secondly, because it's going to be impossible to build a detection tool that will be able to detect all pieces of synthetic content in the wild. So rather than taking the approach of let's detect everything that's fake, it's the idea of let's capture authenticity at its source. So this can come in both a hardware or software form. And actually one of the companies that I advise, TruePic, has already built the technology to do this. It's called secure capture technology. So you can either have it as software, which you install on your app or your platform, where you cryptographically seal in the metadata of an image or a video at the moment that you capture it, all this data that proves that it's authentic. But you can also take an approach where it's actually built into the hardware of a camera or a smartphone. And this is already possible, right? So it's only, and really, I think it's actually only last month, the camera manufacturer Leica has said that they are going to release a model of their camera, which has this built into the hardware of the camera itself. So if, let's say, you're a photographer or a reporter, you're documenting human rights abuses, you don't have to do the fight later on to prove that the images or the record that you've captured is authentic, because that's already cryptographically sealed into the metadata of the content you've captured through the hardware of the actual camera. So this is, again, as I mentioned, the idea of capturing authenticity at the point of capture rather than only relying on detecting what's fake.
So in a way, it sounds like almost another way, and perhaps it's going to be built into all of the frameworks that we're beginning to think about and promulgate with regards to zero trust.
Well,
zero trust.
It'll be right? Absolutely fundamental. It's exactly that approach, the cybersecurity approach of zero trust to all digital content. I mean, if you basically, it's not only that it has to be in the hardware of devices, but if, for instance, you are a marketplace or a platform, you absolutely will have to prove whether the content is authentic or not, because zero trust is the only way to go in a world where everything will be, not only can everything be synthetically generated at scale, but if you look at the direction, because of the scalability of these AI algorithms, the amount of content that is authentic is going to shrink massively in proportion to that, which is synthetic. So you absolutely have to authenticate content.
Yes. And you made the point earlier, Nina, that we haven't even begun to see synthetic content at scale. Yeah. How do you see that unfolding? And do you see it unfolding exponentially? How do you envision that's going to come about in this in apocalypse?
Yeah, in the apocalypse. No, it absolutely is happening exponentially. So I've been following or researching this field since 2017, when you kind of first saw the first kind of gasps of this technology being used in the form of non-consensual pornography. Then it became clearer and clearer that it's not, this is something AI is going to be used to create all synthetic content. But this is the watershed year where these large general models that can basically generate anything, right? Whether it's an image, a text, whether it's copy, whatever you think of as something that a human needs to create, this is the first year that these models have actually been not only released, but released open source. Even 12 months ago, we were hypothesizing that this might be possible, but nobody thought we'd hit that within a year. And it's happening. You see it being integrated into the ecosystem of legitimate companies and apps. You see an incredible amount of money. You see an incredible amount of research just going into this space. So kind of the phrase generative AI, if you haven't heard it yet, you'll certainly be hearing a lot more of it in the next kind of 6 to 12 months. I think we are basically now in the era of generative AI. It's no longer hypothetical, it's happening, and the models are being released. And in my book, I made an estimate that by 2030, 90% of video content online would be generated by AI. And if you ask me about that stat now, I think that that's actually too conservative. I think we'll probably hit that within the next 2 years or so.
Wow, in the next 2 years. That's incredible. And you said it before in our talk here today, that the corrosion of the information ecosystem is real, that this amount of synthetic AI-driven content is infiltrating our information ecosystem. It's spreading at scale. This is the watershed year when this is really going to start to scale out. And the implications are very staggering and alarming, to say the least.
Yeah, and the other thing to point out is that it's not only visual content, because initially when people think about deepfakes, or a lot of the initial focus was on kind of the videos, the images, but it's also text. So you can already use things like GPT-3 and GPT-3 being integrated into various kind of applications to generate whatever you want, whether it's SEO or marketing copy or disinformation blogs, which you can just, with a few clicks of a button, you can generate at scale. So it's literally anything you see, read, or experience might be generated, and probably will be generated by AI.
Right. So is it real or is it a deep fake? It's the critical question that we should all be asking ourselves. And if it is real, how do we know? What do we have available to us to prove the authenticity of the information? Because that is foundational to being able to get after this. To your point, we will not be able to identify all the things that are fake. There's just too much out there. We have to have the zero trust approach. Assume that it's a deep fake. Assume that it's synthetic. And we're looking for the proof. We're looking for the authorized proof that it is real. Nina Schick, thank you so much for your insights. This has been very revealing, very exciting work. Please continue to write about this important topic. There's so many implications of this that we've talked about here today, not just from a technical standpoint. Certainly, we've talked about the implications on warfighting, on national security. Here today, we've talked about the implications on our society and on how we are going to have to think through and respond to this from a legal, educational standpoint. How do we teach ourselves how to think about information in new and discerning ways? The Coming Infocalypse is a book that we all need to read. Thank you so much, Nina Schick, for being with us here today and being a part of our summit.